So, John?
So I'm not really going to talk about Professor Morris's background as much because that's already in the printed program. You can go about reading that and find out that he is an accomplished professional in industrial design. But I wanted to say a few words about why I sought him out to come talk to us tonight. And it starts with the fact that since I've been at Western Washington University, I've recognized that the students in our industrial design program are amazing. And they do some amazing creative work. I've always been astounded by the work that they do, and they have been recognized time and time again for winning awards. And it's just a wonderful program that came to my mind as I was thinking about this conference, because in my mind this was all about innovation and creativity. And I began to think about the innovation and creativity that was occurring in that particular program. And I thought maybe I could find someone from that program that could talk about how to support and generate those creative and innovations. And as I was looking into the program more, and I came across Jason Morris's name, who I had run across before, and he naturally came to the forefront of being an option for us to invite. He does an excellent job in supporting his students with creative development. He is a video producer himself that he'll show us, I think, some of his work tonight, and it has won awards in that field as well. And so I was very impressed by his ability to support his students and for his ability to communicate with an audience. So with that, I'd like to, very happy to introduce our speaker, Professor Jason Morris.
Okay, we'll wait. Waiting for the projector to begin. Well, thanks for inviting me here, John. And I'm not going to talk so much about the technology, but more about creativity and about from a designer's perspective and also from an educator's perspective. And some of the challenges that we're dealing with in terms of teaching students about how to be creative in their work. Here we go. So I give an exercise to my sophomore industrial design students. And this is the first day. I say we have 3 everyday objects. We've got a paper clip, a brick, and a blanket. What I'd like you to do is to come up with as many uses, alternative uses for these 3 items, and write them down, sketch them, do whatever, however you like, and come up with as many as you can, and use whatever method of conceptualization or brainstorming that you would like to use. Okay, ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3, get set, go. And then what happens? Well, kind of what you would expect would happen is the room looks like, the room looks like this. They all put their heads down, they get a piece of paper out, they get out their pen, and the room gets very quiet, and they start diligently working on their ideas. So 20 minutes goes by, and I mean, from a designer's perspective, we say, no, this is really interesting because they turned into test mode. They're like, okay, they've been trained. They've been trained as students in a typical education setup. Like, okay, we're in test mode now. I didn't say it was a test. They didn't collaborate with each other. They didn't. There were magazines in the room they could have used to look and get inspiration. They could have used their phones and their laptops, normally forbidden. And they could have all done all sorts of different ways of coming up with ideas. But no, they went into test mode and they did that method. So this is what business wants, right? Business needs innovation. So how do we respond to that as educators or as managers? Innovation requires a number of things, but for the most part it requires creativity. And creativity in most classrooms and in most organizations is pretty much discouraged by and large. And the way our educational system is set up is we encourage these things: short-term memorization and test-taking skills versus creative problem solving. That's how we measure academic progress, right? Short-term memorization, test-taking skills, you're a good student. But that's not the case in the professional world. So a quote from Tom Peters saying, "Education's leaving all of our children behind. It's totally misaligned to deal with tomorrow's uncertain, ambiguous, creativity-driven economy." So we have a problem. So we have obstacles to overcome. We have behaviors that we need to change. So students come to my class, we have to kind of reconfigure and relearn about technology and what they're doing here. So I'm going to propose 7 different ways that you can encourage innovation and creativity within a classroom or within an organization. These are pretty broad. And also talk and show you 3 projects done by my students that illustrate some of those methods. And each of those are presented as videos. And these are based not only on my own experience as a professional designer and also as an educator, but also on research studies about creativity and about people's relationship with trying to be creative. Let's talk about the first 3, and then we'll get into a project. So think of a good idea right now. So if you have pressure to come up with an idea, then it's going to be very difficult to come up with that. So, and this is the pressure to perform. And this happens as business. Probably experience this all the time. You have to perform. You know, it's not the time to experiment and mess around. This is time to get results. Which is why maybe if you're a manager or a boss, that you shouldn't really be part of the brainstorm session, because your presence there exhibits a pressure of authority and also a pressure to perform. And in fact, bosses shouldn't be part of brainstorming sessions. Now we'll talk about other ways of reducing pressure. But we can also, and now that we're learning, we're studying more about introverts, and being an introvert myself, I understand that sometimes I come up with my best ideas not in the meeting, but by myself. And so another way to reduce pressure is to maybe not just have brainstorm meetings together as a group, but also have them separately and individually come up with ideas and then come back together. Now on the other side, the pressure of time can be a positive effect, because the constraints can actually facilitate creative thought, because you don't have time to edit yourself. So you have to come. It's like improv. You don't have time to edit out what you're thinking, so you just say whatever stupid thing comes to your mind. It's very hard to be around discouraging people, like your boss or a teacher or a professor. People who are negative and discouraging, they're not a good influence on innovation, right? And if you're surrounded by those people, it's very difficult to voice the creative ideas. So I try my best to encourage a really encouraging atmosphere within the classroom and the studio. Tolerate ambiguity. So creativity is messy. It's unresolved, it's cloudy, it's ambiguous. And the creative process is not always resolved. It doesn't always come together. And there may not be a clear conclusion at the end of a meeting. And what you'll find is that there won't necessarily be one right answer. There'll be many right answers, and they'll have different degrees of rightness. So if you have a low tolerance of ambiguity, and you need things all neat and buttoned up, then this will restrict some of that creative freedom. Now let's talk about a project. It's hard to break out of some conventional thinking when you're trying to solve old problems. And so we need to try a new approach, a new method, a new direction. And one way to remove some preconceptions is to not tell the students what they're working on. And so we remove the constraint of function. And the way we do that in their studio classes is I assign abstract form studies or sculptures. Now the form studies have very specific rules. They have to be a certain size, they have to have certain elements, they have to conform to certain aspects of design. But the students just think they're working on form, and that they're just trying to make some interesting forms. But after a couple weeks of doing these, then I reveal to them what they're actually doing. Now, what you've actually been doing there is you've been designing a restaurant, or a retail space, or a piece of furniture, or this is a vehicle. And so they refine and they modify these forms, and they transform them into functional objects and spaces, like a chaise lounge, or a vehicle, or a restaurant, or a retail space. So let me share this video with you. So after all this was over, the students would tell you that they would have never come up with those designs if we had just done it the traditional way. If I just said, oh, just go ahead and design a car or a motorcycle, it would have been completely different. And they would have gotten a bit more conventional, a bit more derivative in terms of their work. So number 4 is shut out preconceptions, and this is something we were trying to do with this project. Because if we were to design a project right now, if we were to say, okay, here's your design project, I want you to design a chair. So what image comes immediately to mind? Well, the chair, it probably has 4 legs. Maybe it's made of sticks of wood. Maybe it's like the ones you're sitting in now. Maybe it looks a little something like that. Maybe this is the chair in your mind's eye, symbolic version of a chair. So the word chair puts us on a path right away. It gives us preconceptions, and the question itself is restrictive because of the definition of the word chair. And we'll tend to design variations of that thing. But on the other hand, let's change the question. Let's say, how can I design a form for sitting? What's a form for sitting? So what images come to mind then? A form for sitting. Well, it could be anything, right? It doesn't have to have 4 legs. It doesn't have to be wood. It could be any form, any material, and now I have the open possibility just by changing the phrasing of how we phrase our problem. So those preconceptions, they restrain us, they restrict us, and this project removes some of those preconceptions and it also removes the pressure to be creative because the creativity is in the process itself. So different path, different solution. Now, this project also demonstrates another way to encourage innovation, and that's to reward risk-taking. This is a hard thing to do in education, or in business anywhere, actually. Because risk-taking means that you're going to have failures. I like this quote from Phil Daniels. He says, "Reward excellent failures and punish mediocre successes." I put this on the board and the students cringe. For most of us, the thing that prevents us from being creative is the fear of failure. Creative thinking requires an environment where we're free to fail, because most of those ideas will fail. And if you're afraid to fail, not given that freedom, then you won't be creative. You'll just do the conservative thing, you do the safe thing. In fact, in design we say the price that you pay for one good idea is 99 bad ones. You've got to go through the process of coming up with 100 ideas in order to find that gem. Now this project rewards risk-taking, and also we really encourage radical concepts. And because not all these projects works out, you saw the good ones. But that's okay. They're free to experiment, free to fail. And by providing that kind of environment, they can reduce their fear of risk-taking. This next project is an exploration into the technology of augmented reality. So another way to remove these preconceptions is to deal with a technology that's so new that it doesn't really have any precedent. And for designers, that's really exciting, because the potential is wide open. It's pretty limitless. And we're free to imagine what it could be, what it could do. And while you're talking about ideas, you can't just say, well, that won't work, because who knows? Maybe in 10 years it will. In 2009, Pranav Mistry of MIT came up with a form of augmented reality called Sixth Sense. And he describes it as a wearable gestural interface that augments the physical world around us using hand gestures to interact with the information. And it basically consists of a camera and a projector and a smartphone and some markers on your fingers. So Sixth Sense sees what you see and augments surfaces around you with that information. And this is really exciting for us to think about. And the way I like that, for me, I think it's a real paradigm shift, because we're used to looking into the computer's world, right? We look through a screen and we look into the computer's world. And this was an idea where the computer's looking out into our world and wondering how we can interact, how it can interact with us, rather than us dealing with it on its turf. But I also felt like there's a lot more potential than a very clunky necklace with lots of gear on it. So we wanted to figure out what the students could do, and what areas, what other things could this possibility of sixth sense technology be. So let me show you. This is a 9-minute video that shows 3 projects. And one is about dealing with a student who has a brother who has autism. Another's about a student who has friends who are part of search and rescue on Mount Hood. And another deals with a student who, wait, now I'm blanking on what the third one is. We'll find out.
The design assignment I gave to these students was to take this new invention, this technology developed at MIT called Sixth Sense, and they're to make it meaningful for people, humanize it, and not just make it another gadget, gadgets that we use in isolation like our phones, but something that can really enable and empower people.
Being a twin to someone with an autistic spectrum disorder gave me a lot of background info on how to address the issues of that customer. So that was fine in a way, but dealing with the concept of a wearable computer is a really tough challenge.
So he's my twin brother, same age, and I'm trying to orient the Sixth Sense device to solve some of the problems that he has interacting with people socially and putting himself into different social situations. I played around with the idea of making an interface that lets you interact with somebody else who has this device, and this can be an opportunity for 2 people who have a learning disability, a speech disability, to interact with each other. I imagine being able to read body postures, read gestures, like be able to get a sense of what people are feeling and thinking, and give a signal to the person wearing it, like, like this is what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Technology in the classroom now, children are using laptops and becoming computer literate at much younger ages, and it's taking up a lot of the teachers' resources for monitoring all this technology. They have a lot of in-service days that are focused just on technology, and they don't have time to update themselves in any other way. And kids are just closing themselves off, using the laptop, not even socializing. If they have a class party, they'd rather use a laptop instead of hanging out with their classmates. Assisting children without making them dependent on it is sort of the goal. And then some children interacting with each other using one device used for both, or their devices working together and swapping information between the 2.
My focus for Sixth Sense is rescue, or search and rescue, and disaster relief situations from climbers getting stuck on mountains or lost on mountains, and we have to, have a bunch of volunteers deployed and up on the mountain as quick as possible to start searching, to things like Katrina. Things like if there's a missing person, they can, if somebody's searching, they can get a brief right there on their person projected so that they can see like height, hair color, I don't know, where they were last seen. Another concept was a little map of showing like how, what areas in the search area have been searched already and where everybody else is in relation to you.
So the solution I'm working towards is a device that is encompassed in one object that you can take and go with you and can be on your person at all times. And considering the extra physical sensitivity that people with autistic disorders can have, I'm trying to make something that can be worn in a lot of different orientations, can be customizable, can be more comfortable or more discreet. I ended up making a form that would work best with a fabric wrapped around so that you could cradle it maybe in a scarf, around a belt, and trying to keep the corners pretty round to just keep a lower profile, and just making sure I can keep it as small as I can because nobody wants a big clunky thing on their body. Like an example would be if you need to be waiting in a line and you might forget, or you might not understand the situation, or you need to be paying attention. In school, you need to be paying attention to a casual social conversation. The Sixth Sense device can be there to be a prompt, to be some kind of a guide into what you need to be doing. But hopefully this device could have applications where it can present you information in a discrete way that is only accessible to you and doesn't bother the people around you.
Well, the design is a desktop device that has a mirror, so the projector will display an interface onto the desk. You're now interacting with any desk. You can use your fingers or a pen, infrared pen, that the camera will pick up those signals and then track the pen's movements. A student at a desk and have another one at the adjacent desk and shift information from screen to screen and have those two devices network so they can shift information between. Information sharing works well in the classroom. So you can share it with the peers next to you, you can share it with the professor or the teacher. So information sharing is such a key aspect of that, since it's out in the open. It helps build relationships between the students. It helps build relationships between the student and the teacher. It's something very important in education. It's something that technology, as it's being applied now to education, is sort of lacking. So everybody who has their laptop sitting at their desk, they're closed off. They're getting sucked into the digital world.
What search and rescue already have on them, like, you know, they have to have a walkie-talkie and all these things, which they have to wear in their front, this little front pack that they always need access to because they're using maps, they're using GPS, and be in communication with everybody. And so I thought, oh, might as well integrate into that and make it all at hand in front. And it's kind of reminiscent of maybe a baby carrier. But you have this small device that takes the place of probably a walkie-talkie, a compass, things like that. And in addition, it has highly sensitive microphones that can sense maybe sounds off in the distance from people that are in trouble, and an integrated GPS that can kind of tell. So if I was a search and rescue personnel up on the mountain doing a search party with like 10 or 20 different people, just the communication that could be possible with that. Seeing a map, you'd have a screen that comes down and it's projected on here. You don't have to take your gloves off because the technology is gesture-based. You can have your gloves on and interact with the device alone. It's a great thing. The search pattern that you guys are going to do in sectors you've already searched, but there's some situations that are so horrible, so unexpected that they don't know how to fix. You know, they can transmit that down to a doctor base of the mountain and walk them through what they should actually do so that person can come home and be alive. Maybe the solution that I was so caught up in really wasn't the right one at all, and I should have opened up my view a little bit more. I'm surprised that I did that, because usually I'm really open, I think, to possibilities, because that's what you have to do in the beginning of an ideation. You really have to open up your mind for anything, any crazy idea, and I think I closed it down too early. But I backtracked a little bit and realized, wait, I'm giving up all these great options, that really applying it to this situation in particular. So.
So that project deals with number 6, and that is imagine the impossible. And I really try to avoid being negative, critical in the context of the class and say, well, you can't do that, that won't work. And because that stops the flow of creativity. But there's another reason why it's not advisable to do that, and that is because there's this odd chance that you could be wrong. And in fact, maybe it will work. And when you think about it, the great things, really the really exciting things happen when everybody said that it couldn't work and somebody figured out a way for it to work. And I think about a story my dad told me, who was in high school in the mid-50s, and he said that his physics teacher and his physics book actually said that there was no such thing. It was impossible to have a coherent light source, that is a single wavelength of single with undiffused direction. And they were right at the time, because theoretically it wasn't possible. But then 5 years later, in 1960, Theodore Maiman operated the first functioning laser at Hughes Research Labs in California, demonstrating what his physics book just 5 years earlier said was impossible. So that's another reason just to keep in mind of things that could happen that we never expect. The last project I want to show you is about interaction technology, and this is one we just did last quarter. And the way we interact with computers today is through mice and keyboards and touch screens, but there's plenty of problems with these interfaces. And I challenge my students to look at the problems with these interfaces today, to find the issues that computer applications and other types of computer devices don't address. Which brings me to a 7th way to encourage innovation, and that's the question everything. And that was our theme for this project, was to question everything. We don't need to accept things as they are. And as designers, we're always questioning why something is that way. And many things in our lives we've become accustomed to. And as technologists, you are aware that we've become accustomed to them, even though they are flawed. And we've grown used to their flawedness. And so much so that we start to not see their shortcomings anymore. For instance, one student who's very close to his elderly grandmother, he sees her frustration with computers. And he sees her isolation, her loneliness. And he also found that for many of the older generations, computers are difficult to learn. They're frustrating, they're complex, they're complicated. Another student who really longs to feel more connected to his girlfriend back in Oregon noticed that, well, even if you do have 500 friends on Facebook, how meaningful are those relationships anyway? And what about those people that you're really the closest to? How can technology create an intimacy across long distances? And for another student who loves to cook and prepare meals, wonders, how can I just look at my refrigerator and say, what recipes could I create right now with the ingredients that I have in my kitchen? And also, she's like me, where she goes to the supermarket and then stands there dumbfounded thinking, what was I supposed to get when I was here? And how much milk do we have? And when are the eggs going to be expired? And then another student who has a brother with autism asks how an application can help a parent who has a autistic child, and how start working on remedial behaviors and encourage social bonds. So this last video demonstrates some design concepts, and this is the first time that I've shown these videos, so pretty excited to show you these because students did a great job on them. First is a digital token. And that's to connect and intimately communicate between two people through touch, sight, warmth, and sound. Second is a tablet application for seniors who live in an assisted living community and trying to encourage social relationships. And then third is a two-sided, transparent touchscreen application that encourages social behaviors between a parent and autistic child. Instead of like this, we have it up like this and we're looking at each other. And then finally is a future vision for what an interconnected smart kitchen might be. But before I end with this video, what I found in design classes and in professionally, that if we give students a safe environment for taking risks, and if we put aside some of these preconceptions, if we reduce our fear of failure and our negativity, and we remove some of the pressure, then students will be free to create, they'll be free to be creative and innovate. Let me show you this last. Thanks for your time and attention.
So please, we have some time for some questions.
Sure. And one thing I wanted to point out on that last video, that students didn't have much digital video experience. They learned how to shoot, edit. They did all their animations in After Effects. They did storyboarding. And then their actors were just using just pieces of glass and pretending like they were interacting with something, and then they added the interaction later in After Effects using motion tracking. And they figured out motion tracking, and they learned After Effects in a matter of about a week. Yeah, so I have to give them a lot of credit. Yes? Well, we get so we have two ways of narrowing it down. So we have an entrance portfolio where we restrict to 24 students per year, and then after their sophomore year, they have a portfolio review and an interview, and we select 12 students to become juniors and seniors. So we only graduate 12 students a year. So usually we'll get about 50 apply per year. Yeah. Yeah. A design program? Oh. Right. That's a good question, because I think there's some exciting things happening now with like Khan Academy, and people are starting to rethink of how they can do education now that we have access to the internet. And I started doing that myself in my class, but it'd be a good challenge to challenge the teachers and professors to break out of their typical methods. But yeah, that's a good thought to think about. Yeah.
You had one scene where there was some sharing and some collaboration going on, but particularly the first video clip was quiet and all working together.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to imagine there's a lot of interactivity. How do you encourage collaborative work?
Well, yeah, and the thing is when you go and you pull out the camera and you start shooting, they all start behaving themselves. Yeah, and they but the 12 students have a studio that they all share together, and they work there. They camp out there. Sometimes they sleep there. And so there's lots of collaboration that happens automatically, even if they're working on individual projects. The last project was in 2- and 3-person teams, and that worked out really well because they were able to do more in less time, and they were also able to kind of complement each other's strengths. So we're trying to do it more. It's not easy though. Yeah.
This is almost kind of a response, I think, to Ed's question. I was thinking about one of the parts that you said that kind of struck me the most was the idea of shutting out the preconceptions by not telling them what they were working on. And an example that came to mind that I can't remember where I heard about it. I think it might have been on This American Life, or something that it was a K-12 situation where the students were learning about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they were given basically the role play, only they weren't ever told about the Cuban Missile Crisis ahead of time. So to them it was kind of this fictional, imagine if, an enemy country put missiles on a country close to, your country, and kind of the whole story was set up for them, but they weren't really told that this was a real event, that it happened, and they were all given roles, that nobody had been like, told you're President Kennedy, you're, so-and-so, you're Castro, you're whoever. And they were kind of told, solve the problem and figure out, and so they did it, and with very different decisions made and very different outcomes from what actually happened. And then they were told what we were just doing was role-playing the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they were told they did an analysis, they analyzed sort of why did they decide the way that they did. the real players back in the 60s, why did they do what they did, and, kind of looked at that historical thing, and probably learned it to a much deeper degree than they would have if somebody had just said, this is what happened, this is why people did what they did, whatever, and kind of learned it. So I guess I was kind of just trying to think about what are some of the ways in which, as educators, we could take science or history or literature or something and give students problems to solve where we're not telling them why they're solving the problem or what they're working on. I don't know that I...
That's a great example. Excellent example, because it's kind of a hidden analogy, right? You're saying this is what you're doing, but I'm not. But it takes a lot of energy to come up with those, right? It takes a lot of creativity just to come up with those problems. So, yeah, great point. That's a great example. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the project involving the work at the assisted listening center. How did they go about doing the research? They invent themselves at assisted listening,
Right. That was that particular student's very close to his grandmother, and she's in a situation like that. So he was pretty aware of what was going on, and I wish I had given him more time to do some research. He was able to do some research within the time that he had within his own discussions with and I think they also talked with some caregivers about that. So there was, and we've been trying to do that more and more, is include more foundational research behind these designs, so that they're not just, some strange idea that some student thought of for some other culture that they aren't aware of, right? So we have to try to be sensitive to that. It's a good point. Yes, sir.
I find that when students really get engaged in something, they still have to do a history paper because you want to. So how does this fit with the academic program?
I mean, I've tried to apply some of these to kind of more traditional classes too, like a freshman engineering class, for example. And what I've been trying to do is make it more, here's a problem that you need to solve, here's a puzzle, here's something that you need to do. Now, in order to solve that problem, you're going to have to learn some things. And so to devise the problem so that that they have to go through the process of learning some things to solve it, then it becomes about solving the problem, not about like, oh, I got to read this. It's like, oh, I got to read this because it helps me solve my problem. So that's one way that I've been able to use, and I'm sure there's others, but yeah, it's a great point. Yeah.
Follow up on that, I have to ask, how do you grade?
Yeah, grading is difficult because it's a bit subjective. So there's not much quantification that's happening there. All I can do is kind of grade it by different aspects, like how well was the research done, how much concepts did they come up with, and what was the quality of the presentation and the quality of. So it is a bit subjective, and it's not easy. I hate grading. It's the worst part of my job. Yes.
You know that line of my conversation? Don't worry about the crisis. This is great.
Right. Well, we talk about protecting our ideas, but part of the making the videos, for example, they put a lot of work into making those videos, and part of it's communicating an idea to an audience that doesn't really understand it. If you do a lot of hand waving and describing, we call a lot of when you're trying to describe things to the managers and the vice presidents, a lot of them are what we call the imagination impaired. So we have to make things very evident and very, visually, like this is how it works and this is what's going to happen. Like the kitchen video. I mean, like this is what we want it to do. We don't know how that's going to happen, right? But we can figure that out. So a lot of it's practicing our presentations so that we can communicate those things to management or whoever your client. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for your time. All right.